My wife hid our bank account for me while I funded her business, so I closed it and left her life in ruins. I'm a 31-year-old guy, and for most of my marriage, I honestly believed that being the provider was the truest way to show love. I met my wife when her career was still shaky. She had big dreams, but no clear path to making them a reality. I remember sitting in our tiny apartment, the hum of the old fridge filling the silence, as she excitedly sketched out ideas for her first online venture. Something in me clicked. This was someone I wanted to support, not just emotionally, but financially, because I believed in her. From the start, I took on the bills without a second thought. Rent, utilities, groceries, I handled it all. Every time an unexpected expense popped up, whether it was a laptop for her work or emergency car repairs, I was there. I remember the weight of the receipts in my hands, the crumpled papers like tiny reminders of my own sacrifices. I didn't complain, in fact, I wore it like armor. In my mind, this was partnership, this was love in action. She always framed my support as teamwork. "We're building something lasting together," she would say, her eyes sparkling, voice full of conviction. I swallowed that line 1,000 times, letting it soothe my exhaustion, letting it validate my choice to shoulder more than I probably should have. Friends sometimes joked, or warned, that I was too good to be true, that I might be getting taken for granted, but I brushed it off. I told myself that this was normal for couples who truly supported one another. Still, a tiny knot of unease began to grow in my chest. There were small moments, half answers about money, vague updates on her business, that didn't sit right. I pushed the feeling aside, telling myself I was imagining it, but deep down, a quiet voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, my dedication wouldn't be seen or appreciated the way I thought it would. Something was hidden beneath the surface, something I couldn't yet see, and I had no idea how much it would cost me. Things started getting more complicated a few months in, though at the time, I didn't realize just how deep it would go. Her business ideas, which I'd initially thought were small side projects, started taking up more and more of her time, and more of my money. I remember sitting at our kitchen table one evening, the smell of burnt coffee lingering from my half-drunk cup, as she rattled off plans for another online course, a new ad campaign, and a partnership that sounded promising but expensive. "I just need a little more from you this month," she said, biting her lip, a hopeful gleam in her eyes. I nodded, already reaching for my wallet, feeling that familiar surge of pride that I was helping her thrive. I began covering everything: new software subscriptions, website fees, ad costs, even a small contractor she wanted for her social media content. Friends started to notice my constant overtime, my tired eyes, and my barely there weekends. "Man, you're doing too much," one of them said one night over beers. I laughed it off, shaking my head. "It's fine. I just want her to succeed." Deep down, though, a flicker of unease started creeping in, but I silenced it. Her reassurances became almost ritualistic. "This is our future," she'd say, placing her hand over mine, her voice soft but insistent. "We're in this together." And I wanted to believe it, so desperately. I convinced myself that every sacrifice was temporary, that I was investing not just money, but trust and love, and that it would all pay off. But little cracks were forming. Receipts would vanish, some numbers didn't add up, and she grew defensive whenever I asked questions. "Why are you doubting me?" she'd say, her tone hurt, almost wounded. I swallowed my frustration, blaming myself for overthinking. Yet, the uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Something was off, though I couldn't yet put my finger on it, and whatever it was, I had no idea it was about to spiral out of control. By the time her business really started taking off, the small inconsistencies I'd noticed began to pile up like a stack of unpaid bills I couldn't ignore. I'd come home after 12-hour shifts, the hum of traffic outside mixing with the smell of takeout she'd ordered, and notice things that didn't make sense. Receipts missing, invoices vaguely explained, and expenses I hadn't authorized somehow accounted for. "It's just the way the platform works," she'd say, smiling, brushing off my questions. At first, I believed her. I wanted to. But late at night, lying in bed, I couldn't shake the knot in my chest. My mind replayed the numbers, the missing details, the strange patterns. I could hear the faint ticking of the old wall clock, each second punctuating my growing anxiety. Maybe I'm overreacting, I whispered to myself, staring at the ceiling, willing myself to trust her completely. Yet every time I closed my eyes, I saw the receipts, the empty invoices, and that fleeting defensiveness when I asked a simple question. Friends started noticing the change in me too. "You look stressed, man. You're working yourself to the bone for nothing," one said during a lunch break, shaking his head. I forced a smile, telling him it was fine, that I just wanted to help her succeed. But the unease kept creeping in, a whisper I tried to ignore. I began wondering if my sacrifices were truly appreciated, or if they were quietly being taken for granted. One evening, she laughed about a minor expense, joking, "You're like a walking ATM." I froze, the words lingering longer than they should have. Was it just a joke, or a subtle hint of how she really saw me? I pushed the thought aside, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Something in our foundation, what I thought was mutual trust and teamwork, was starting to crumble, and I had no idea how deep the cracks ran. The first real red flag hit me when I noticed she'd taken out a small loan without telling me. I was sorting through our joint statements late one night, the faint hum of the heater filling the apartment, when I saw it, an unfamiliar withdrawal, a chunk of money gone, labeled under her name. My heart sank. I confronted her the next morning, the sunlight glaring off the coffee table as I tried to keep my voice steady. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" I asked, swallowing hard. She laughed lightly, a nervous edge in her voice. "I didn't want to stress you out. It's just temporary, trust me." I wanted to believe her. I really did. I told myself maybe she was right, that she was protecting me from unnecessary worry, that this was part of the sacrifice I willingly signed up for. But the unease in my chest didn't fade, it only tightened like a vice. I started noticing small patterns, late-night phone calls, whispered discussions in another room, quick changes when I entered the office. Each one sent a spike of tension through me, a silent warning that something was wrong. Friends started pressing me too. "You're letting her walk all over you, man. This isn't healthy," one said over beers, but I brushed it off. "I'm just supporting her, it's fine," I said, forcing a smile. But deep down, I knew the warning lights were flashing. I began double-checking accounts, receipts, and invoices, my stomach twisting every time I saw an unfamiliar line. I remember that night lying awake, the city sound seeping through the thin windows, thinking maybe my trust was being weaponized. Maybe the very person I loved most was hiding more than she should. I wanted to confront her again, but something told me the truth would hurt far more than I could handle. And I had no idea just how far it would go. I never thought I'd discover something that would make me question everything about our marriage, but one evening, it happened. I was digging through our shared financial documents, trying to reconcile expenses, when I stumbled across a bank account I had no idea existed. My hands shook as I opened the online portal, the cold glow of the laptop illuminating my face in the dark apartment. Every penny I thought we jointly owned was in her control, flowing into that hidden account. The money I had poured into her business, the savings I'd sacrificed for months, was under her sole command, and she hadn't said a word. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered aloud, my voice cracking, though I was alone in the room. The answer came later, in fragments during a conversation I forced myself to have, her tone casual, almost amused. "I didn't think you'd understand the way I run things." My stomach twisted. I had been funding her life, supporting her dreams, and all the while, she had been quietly operating on her own, without me, without trust. I spent that night pacing the apartment, the hum of the fridge and faint traffic outside turning into a deafening backdrop to my anger and betrayal. Every memory of shared plans, every teamwork promise, felt tainted. I realized that my trust had been exploited, my generosity weaponized, and the foundation of my marriage had been built on a lie. Friends tried to comfort me the next day, but their words barely pierced the fog of disbelief. "Dude, that's manipulation." She knew exactly what she was doing. I nodded silently, staring at the city lights through the window, feeling a mix of rage and despair. For the first time, I understood that the path forward wasn't just about confronting her, it was about reclaiming control, about making her see the consequences of hiding everything from me. And in that moment, as my chest ached and my mind raced, I knew that nothing in our life together would ever be the same. I just didn't know yet how far I was willing to go to take it all back. After discovering the hidden account, everything in our marriage felt like a lie. I tried confronting her calmly, sitting across from her at the kitchen table, the hum of the dishwasher filling the awkward silence. "Why didn't you tell me about the account?" I asked, my voice steady but my hands trembling. She looked at me with that practiced look of innocence, tilting her head. "I didn't want to stress you out," she said softly, almost sweetly, as if that made it okay. My chest tightened, her words weren't comforting, they were poison. She turned the conversation on me, gaslighting me into feeling like I was overreacting. "You're acting paranoid. You've always worried too much," she said, her eyes narrowing just slightly, like she was testing me. I wanted to scream, to make her understand, but instead I sat there, swallowing my frustration, questioning my own judgment. Every supportive action I had taken, every sacrifice, seemed to crumble in my mind, replaced with doubt and anger. The nights became unbearable. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of the city, heart pounding, mind racing. Friends tried to convince me she was manipulating me, but hearing it from others didn't make it easier. I felt trapped, isolated in my own home, unsure if I was overreacting or finally seeing the truth. I started tracking her activity quietly, noting every unexplained withdrawal, every hidden transaction, every small lie I had brushed aside. My hands shook as I wrote it all down, the apartment dark except for the soft glow of my laptop. It felt like I was building a case against someone I still loved, but the love was tangled with betrayal, and the betrayal was suffocating. And even as I planned my next move, a small, terrifying thought settled in my stomach: what if I had underestimated how far she was willing to go to keep control? The quiet of the apartment suddenly felt heavy, like the calm before a storm I couldn't yet see. That night, I hit my breaking point. I was sitting alone in the dark living room, the faint orange glow of the streetlights casting long shadows across the walls, staring at the pile of documents and spreadsheets I'd painstakingly gathered. Every number, every hidden transaction, every lie screamed at me. I felt completely powerless, like all my sacrifices, all my trust, had been taken and twisted into a weapon against me. My chest ached, my hands trembled, and a hollow emptiness settled deep in my stomach. I couldn't even remember the last time I had felt truly safe or respected in my own home. She walked in, humming softly, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "What are you doing up so late?" she asked casually, leaning against the doorway. I wanted to scream, to throw everything at her, to make her see the destruction she'd caused. But instead, I just shook my head, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Nothing," I muttered, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. I felt trapped, emotionally and financially. I had poured my life into this marriage, funded her dreams, and yet here I was, isolated, disbelieving, and crushed. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly, and every attempt to confront her only led to more gaslighting and doubt. Friends told me to leave, to take control, but shame and fear of the unknown held me back. Lying awake later, I stared at the ceiling, thinking of everything I had given, everything I had trusted her with, and how effortlessly she had hidden the truth. My heart raced with a mix of grief and fury. I realized that if I didn't act, I'd lose not just my money, but myself entirely. And yet, in the darkness, a small, stubborn spark of resolve began to flicker. I knew I had to reclaim control, even if it meant tearing apart the life I thought we were building. After days of sleepless nights and racing thoughts, I started piecing together a plan. I sat at the kitchen table, the hum of the fridge blending with the distant sounds of cars passing outside, and laid out every transaction, every receipt, every hidden withdrawal she'd ever made. I realized that the only way to reclaim control was through careful, calculated action. I wasn't going to react impulsively, I needed to be precise. Every move had to be deliberate, every step legally justified, so she couldn't manipulate or gaslight me out of it again. I began quietly documenting everything: emails, invoices, bank statements, creating a record of the financial deception I had endured. I also started monitoring her patterns, her routines, the way she handled money, and even the small tells she couldn't hide. Each piece of information added to my confidence, and for the first time in months, I felt a spark of empowerment amid the despair. I would not allow this betrayal to define me. Friends noticed the change, too. "You're finally standing up for yourself," one said, eyebrows raised as I calmly explained the situation. I nodded, letting their words sink in. It felt good to speak the truth aloud, to frame it as reclaiming dignity, not just money. I could almost taste the eventual satisfaction of holding her accountable, of taking back what had been manipulated from me. And yet, I also knew this wasn't going to be easy. She was clever, practiced in her deception, and underestimating her could cost me everything. The tension in the apartment seemed almost tangible now, a quiet storm building beneath the surface. Every day I watched, waited, and planned, knowing that one wrong move could shatter everything, but I was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The day I finally acted, everything felt surreal. I sat at my laptop in the dim light of the living room, the quiet hum of the city outside like a drumbeat, as I executed the plan I'd been building for weeks. I closed the hidden account, redirecting the funds to a new one under my control, making sure every penny I had contributed was now secure. My hands shook, not from fear, but from a mix of adrenaline, relief, and long-suppressed anger. For the first time, I felt the weight lift slightly, replaced with a cold, calculated satisfaction. I didn't confront her immediately. I let her continue her routine, cooking, working, chatting, blissfully unaware that her empire was quietly slipping from her fingers. Every time she mentioned the account, I nodded politely, hiding the storm that had quietly settled in my chest. "Everything's fine," I said once, watching her smile, and internally, I was counting down the moment she'd realize she'd been outmaneuvered. Friends started noticing a shift in me, too. I was calmer, more composed, and my eyes held a steadiness they hadn't in months. "You finally took back control," one friend said over a late-night beer, and I simply nodded, savoring the truth in that statement. This wasn't revenge in the dramatic, explosive sense, it was quiet, methodical, undeniable. And then it happened, the moment I'd been waiting for. She logged into the account she thought only she controlled, and her face went pale. Panic, disbelief, and fury flashed across her eyes as she realized the truth. She looked at me, searching for a reaction, expecting maybe desperation, maybe tears, maybe confusion. But I stayed calm, letting the silence stretch, knowing she was fully grasping the consequences of hiding everything from me. And in that quiet, heavy pause, I felt the first real sense of power I'd had in months. For the first time, I knew the playing field had shifted, and it was mine. The fallout hit almost immediately, though I let her stew in ignorance for a few hours before addressing it. She stormed into the living room, her face pale, eyes wide, and her usual calm, practiced demeanor shattered. What did you do?" she demanded, voice trembling between anger and panic. I stayed seated, hands resting on my knees, and met her gaze evenly. "I closed the account," I said quietly, letting the words hang in the air. She blinked, speechless for the first time in years. Her panic morphed into a flurry of questions, accusations, and desperate explanations. "You can't do this. That money was for the business," she shouted, pacing, knocking over a chair in her agitation. I simply shook my head. "That money was never yours alone. I funded everything. You hid it from me. Now you have to face the consequences." The weight of my voice, calm but firm, seemed to freeze her in place. Friends and family quickly got involved, some shocked by her audacity, others impressed by my composure. "I can't believe she pulled this off for so long," one friend murmured, shaking his head. I kept my focus on her reaction, watching the realization slowly dawn. The safety net she had relied on was gone, and she had no one to manipulate or gaslight anymore. She scrambled to salvage what she could, frantically trying to rebuild her business and secure funds, but every move was now under scrutiny. Her confidence was gone, replaced with desperation. And for the first time, I felt the emotional shift in the room, not just control over the finances, but a reclaiming of my dignity, my voice, and my life. And even as the tension hung thickly between us, I knew this was only the beginning of her reckoning. Whatever she had planned, whatever manipulation she had relied on, it was unraveling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. After the chaos settled, I finally had a chance to breathe and think clearly. Sitting in the quiet of the apartment, the faint hum of traffic outside my window, I reflected on everything that had happened, the hidden account, the lies, the endless manipulation. I realized that for months, maybe years, I had been bending over backward for someone who never intended to meet me halfway. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every ounce of trust one gave had been taken for granted. The anger lingered, but beneath it was a quiet sense of clarity. I understood now that my worth wasn't measured by how much I could give someone else, it was measured by how fiercely I protected my own dignity and boundaries. Friends reached out over the following weeks, some offering support, others sharing stories of similar experiences. "You finally saw it and acted," one said. And they were right, I had. I wasn't just reclaiming money or control over our finances, I was reclaiming my life. I thought about the countless moments I had doubted myself, questioned my judgment, or let her gaslighting wear me down. Each reflection was painful, but necessary. I also began to understand the importance of vigilance and self-respect in relationships. Trust is essential, yes, but blind trust can be dangerous, especially when one person is hiding the truth. I realized that love and partnership weren't just about giving, they were about mutual accountability, honesty, and respect. I had learned the hard way what happens when those lines are crossed. And yet, even with all the lessons and clarity, I felt something else, an unexpected sense of peace. The storm had passed, the chaos had settled, and for the first time, I felt truly in control of my life. But deep down, I knew the final chapter of this story, the part where closure truly hits, was still coming. The days that followed felt surreal, almost like waking from a long, exhausting nightmare. I moved through the apartment with a newfound calm, the hum of the city outside no longer oppressive but grounding, a reminder that life went on. She eventually realized the full scope of what had happened, the hidden account was gone, every penny under my control, and the trust she had so casually broken was shattered beyond repair. I watched her scramble to rebuild her business, face her mistakes, and cope with the consequences of years of deception. It wasn't malicious revenge, it was simply the natural result of her choices. I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace. Not just the absence of betrayal, but the presence of empowerment, control, and clarity. I no longer had to wonder if my generosity was being exploited or my trust weaponized. I had reclaimed my dignity, my finances, and my life. The quiet satisfaction of standing firm, of taking deliberate, calculated action rather than reacting in anger, was intoxicating. Friends noticed the change too, they said I walked taller, spoke firmer, and smiled more freely. I realized that the real victory wasn't just financial, it was emotional. I had survived manipulation, deceit, and betrayal, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. The storm she had created no longer controlled me, I controlled my own life, my own destiny. And in the stillness of that evening, as the sunset filtered through the blinds and the faint city hum filled the room, I finally felt closure. The lessons, the pain, the sleepless nights, they had all led to this moment. I was free. I was empowered. And for the first time in years, I could imagine a future built entirely on my own terms, where trust would be earned, boundaries respected, and my worth never questioned again.